The more I have lived on planet Earth, the more I've realized that people have children to make them happy. Parents, moms, dads have children so that the child can make them happy. And it's kind of ironic. You would think that you would have a child so that you can help this child meet their emotional needs. But the more I see into it, the more I realize people oftentimes have children because they're struggling with their own loneliness. They're struggling with their own feelings of maybe insecurity. Maybe they're being pressured by society. I've talked with my parents about why they decided to have children, and a lot of it was just societal pressure. They said, by 25 you were expected to have kids back in the 90s. That was just the norm. There was a societal pressure. And then my dad always makes the joke, if you weren't married and with kids by 25, they would say that the bus had already left you. And it's funny, but it just goes to show how easily convinced and influenced people can be by societal standards. Now, I do think societal standards has a role to play in why people decide to have children. But the other side of this is 100% emotional in my experience, in my opinion. As I've gotten older, I'm 29 now, and I've realized that in the past when I wanted to have a child, I did want to have a kid when I was, I think, 20, 21. And then I think I turned 22, started reflecting a little bit more on it. At 22, actually still wanted to have a kid. But even now, when I get that urge to have a child, when I feel that vacancy in my life to have a child, I have to admit, that comes from an emotional place. When I feel that I want a kid because I'm lonely and I don't have that traditional family, I don't have that system around me, that derives from an emotional need out of myself. And the more I think to myself, if I were to ever have a child, it would really be number one for me to please myself, to help me meet my emotional needs, to help me not be as lonely, to make me feel like something perhaps greater than what I am currently, to make me feel like a leader, to make me feel like someone who has influence over this life, so to make me feel almost kind of like a god. Parents are a god to their children. They determine everything about that children's life. That's the closest thing that we get to being God in this world, is having children, or having a godlike influence, because we have a godlike influence over our lives. So we're already there in regards of godliness. But when it comes to influencing other people, having children, dude, you have all the power. Which is, I think, another reason why people like to have children. I think it gives them power. I think it gives them status. I think it fulfills certain emotional vacancies that they have in their heart. Because when I personally think about having children, and when that want comes out of me, I notice, man, this is not coming out of the pure wish to just bring a life into this world. This is coming from my own vacancies. This is coming from my own deficits. This is coming from my loneliness. This is coming from my lack of being a leader. This is coming from my lack of feeling that I am influencing a child. I've heard people say, I want to have children because I want to teach them my values. And I think a piece of it is that. And the more I've grown, the more I realize I just want to teach myself my values and other people who are open to my values. Having children comes from a place of emotional need. And I feel like anyone who's honest with themselves can see this. If you're honest with yourself, and if you were to take yourself back to when you had a child, I think a big piece of it was just excitement of, oh, what is everyone going to think? How am I going to be perceived now as a father or a mother? Now I'm in charge of this baby. I have even increased motivation to, work or be better, which is, I think it's a good thing to have increased motivation, although I don't think the motivation should come from the child. Of course, if you have a child, there's increased instinctual motivation in that. But sometimes you do come across those people who are like, man, this will really push me. It's like, no, you got to push yourself. You already have to be in a position where you've achieved the major things in your life before you have children, especially in 2025. And in this society, you have to have a high-paying job. You have to have a career. You have to be financially stable. Without those things, your risk for exposing that child to trauma is a lot higher. So the more I've reflected on this, the more I realize that having children is 100% almost always a decision that parents make to meet their own emotional needs. And since they are expecting the child to bring them happiness, they are expecting the child to make them feel whole, because there's a hole there emotionally. There's a void. And I think there's a spectrum to kind of what is healthy and what is unhealthy in regards to being a parent. Some parents, of course, have lots of trauma, and that generational trauma gets passed down from the parent to the child. Other parents have healed from their trauma, and the trauma doesn't get passed down as severely onto the child. But I do find that oftentimes people who have sometimes very severe trauma, very severe abandonment, are some of the first people to actually want children. They're some of the first people to want to procreate. And it's like the easiest math problem when you see it with a level of emotional intelligence. You see that dynamic, someone who has had abandonment wanting to have a child. You could see, okay, well, you want to have a child because perhaps you unconsciously want to be able to prove to yourself that true love can exist, or in a way you are unconsciously repairing your own abandonment by being there for this child. And given you are healthy and given you are healed and you've practiced the self-reflection, perhaps you can do that. But if you haven't self-reflected, if you haven't healed, if you haven't really truly prepared yourself, it just will become a cyclic cycle once again. So, man, I could still think of more perks to having children. For example, the children can never leave your side. Man, how emotional fulfilling is that? Like, to be dependent on, I feel, fulfills an emotional need the parent has. Like, yeah, this little Bubba right here, they can't leave me if they wanted to. I could do anything, be anything, and as long as I'm not severely abusive, they're stuck here. There's something about that I feel like just fulfills this emotional void that the parent has. And it just goes back to the original point. It's like sometimes people decide to have children because there's just all of these perceived like benefits, emotional, social, financial. They can't leave you. You're a leader. You're a god to them. And I think that really that really evokes a sense of pride in a parent, that evokes a sense of godliness that a parent without having a child would never be able to experience. And if that parent is, if their underlying need is to be powerful, what other better place is there to practice that than in a parent-child relational dynamic? And of course, people who have sometimes had trauma and have experienced complete and total lack of power, sometimes unconsciously want to bring children into the world, I feel, to have that power, to, in a sense, kind of heal themselves from the past. Or if someone was abandoned, they want to have children in order so that they can prove to themselves that unconsciously that abandonment can be resolved, if that makes sense. I know it's a little hard to understand, but the more I think about this subject, it's and I try to have empathy, and I try to have understanding, but the more I see it, the more I just see kind of like, oh my God, like the reason we're having these children is like very self-centered. We're having them so that we can take these cute Christmas pictures and that we can have like this family party. And, I think it's like we think about all the cute things, but we don't really think about all like the super like deeper things, like the day-to-day living. We don't think about systemic oppression. We don't think about racism. We don't think about financial oppression, economic oppression. We just have these emotional needs. And what kind of society could we become if we just focused on our own healing instead of bringing children into the world in order to heal our traumas? These are the questions I have on a daily basis. Imagine if we fostered a society that was focused on healing their own trauma rather than bringing in children to make them happy and subsequently heal their trauma. At least that's what the goal is. Usually what I see is actually ends up backfiring entirely, and it creates more trauma for the parent and the child, more stress and more suffering. So this is why it's so important to heal from trauma. And I think after healing from trauma, creating emotional independence. I think emotional independence is one of the greatest skills that you can have in this life. And I want to make a point of separation between emotional independence and like self-centered, being a self-centered individual, because there's a lot of emphasis that I hear about how like we are a self-centered society. Gen Z is self-centered, millennials are self-centered, but people have kind of had to be forced to be self-centered, at least when it comes to having children, because having children nowadays is so much more difficult than having children back even 20 years ago, 25, 30 years ago. And that there's a forced self-centeredness. There's this forced, and I would not say it's a self-centeredness, it's like a self-prioritization. It's preventing potential stress, potential trauma, generational trauma. The human population has quadrupled since the 60s. It's okay. We can slow down the birth rate, man. And I know there's a lot of implications that go into that, like older average ages in society, but we can take care of that. I really think we have the resources to be okay. So to end my video, people have children so that the children could meet their emotional needs. And we all do this, whether conscious or unconsciously. Some of us, I think that's the baseline. The baseline is we all Everyone who has a child at some level, whether conscious or unconscious, has it so that the child can make them feel more fulfilled and more happy, without question. Now, some of these individuals are going to be a little healthier than the other ones. So it's going to range on a spectrum from healthy, healed from trauma, to unhealthy, unhealed from trauma, and replicating the traumas, replicating abandonments, replicating abuses, whether consciously or unconscious. And healing from the trauma is really the saving grace in this situation. And emotional independence, healing from trauma, whether they're one and the same or two different entities, I really feel is like the solution in our society is emotional independence. Of course, this does not mean isolating yourself, and this does not mean being self-centered, because you can be emotionally independent and you can still contribute to social justice causes. You can still show up for friends. You can still be a great family member. You can still help society in ways that people with children simply cannot, because they have the responsibility of taking care of children. And when you have that, you can't be freaking Superwoman or you can't be Superman out in the world. You can only be so much in this life. You got to pick one thing and that's it. You know, it's like, so yes, I think through deeper self-reflection, our generation, the 30 and unders, we really have to think about the state of the world. We have to think about our own emotional needs and how we may be wanting children out of a place of total, almost self-centeredness. As ironic as it is, as ironic as the parents kind of point fingers to the childless people and say, oh, they're self-centered, I could say the childless people could also point fingers to the parents and say the same thing. And I would say, you know, at least the self-centeredness of the childless person is not bringing in lives that are not choosing to be here into the world, in which there's a lot of potential suffering. And the self-centeredness of the parent, they are bringing in a life and potential suffering and also potential pleasure. We can't discount that. But I'm sorry, but if you're born into middle class America or lower middle class or poverty, girl, you lying to yourself if you are walking around thinking that middle class is a life of luxury and a wonderful thing to experience on a daily basis, because it's not. Even if you love what you do, even after doing so much of what you love, it gets tiring. So it's life is, I feel, a little bit more suffering than it is pleasure and social connection. I know it sounds kind of dark. Maybe my perspective will change at the end of the day, but for the parents that bring in children, you're bringing in a child onto this life where you have to work very hard. There's lots of stress, there's lots of trauma. And even if you are a healed parent, you're still bringing them into a traumatized society. So that came out of a self-centered place, and not only it's coming out of a self-centered place, now it's exposing this whole innocent being to all of this. So what is more self-centered? I'll leave the video at that. All right, guys, I know this sounded kind of mean, and I don't want to be sounding mean, but I think it's critical that this younger generation starts to think more critically about having children and the reasons why they want to have children. And I think we have to realize some of the great things that can come from a society and a world that has maybe a smaller population. I think we can extend resources. We can extend, our human wellness. We can increase it. I think right now we're at an all-time low with our mental health. I mean, there's more people, so more people are going to be reporting, but it's just overall, it's kind of a mentally unhealthy society. So we have to think twice before bringing in more life into this world, and think about how can we already protect and serve and nourish the life that's already here, and focus on healing all the unhealed life that is already here before bringing in more life that can be potentially traumatized and damaged. Alrighty, guys, peace. and love. Also, my channel's been growing by like a subscriber every other day, and I just want to say thank you, because it's just so cool. Like, I'll check my channel like every day, and it's like randomly just like an extra subscriber. I'm like, what? Where'd they come from? It's just so cool that it's just growing by itself now. It's so cool, man. That's so cool. So, alright guys, peace and love.